Hey guys, it's Danae, and I'm back again with another episode of A Millennial Voice with the Philadelphia Sunday Sun. Again, I'm here every Sunday at 2 p.m., as you guys already know because you guys are so loyal. But this week, I have here with me author Morgan Green, and she's going to talk about her books. I was able to read one particular chapter called Habits that took me right back to my college experience. And you won an award, the Raymond Carver Award, correct?
Yeah, it was the Raymond Carver short story writing contest for 2021.
Yeah, so she just won a contest, which I think is so cool. So I had to have her on the show. But Morgan, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. Okay. So my name is Morgan Green. I'm from Abington, PA. Basically, the story Habits, that's the story that won the contest. It follows a girl named Maya Burton, and she's walking home from just a general hookup, and she's kind of like exploring what's going on in her life. And she's a biracial girl in a predominantly white school in the middle of central PA. So she kind of feels like a fish out of water. And
Yeah.
she's just realizing that, her her life has just been a series of habits, sort of like she's kind of just going through the motions and like picking up things to try to run from what she's really feeling and what she's really hurting from. And she's realizing throughout the story that those habits aren't necessarily serving her, and she's kind of reaches that a point where she's like, okay, well, if this isn't working, like what is going to work, and should I stop what I'm doing because it's not working, or
Yeah.
should I keep doing it because it's a habit at this point?
Yeah, which I think is something that, all of us can relate to. We've all been there, whether it's like with a partner, whether it's like different type of vices that we might have taken part in, to possibly, feel better about our current situation. Just
Yeah.
a whole myriad of things that I think that, people have gone through. So even if this wasn't their explicit experience, I feel like it's so relatable. So do you find yourself in this character? Like, is it like a bit anecdotal? Or
I would say yes and no. Like it reminds me, like I've described it before, kind of like a drag queen, putting on drag, like and creating like a persona. Like it is still similar to the original person, but like it's a way of like transforming them into a different version, or like like a different universe. Because like if you think about the multiverses, like there's a lot of, like, you could, based off of different decisions you make, different outcomes, different, you could be an entirely different person, or your life could be an entirely different way. So she definitely deals with things that I've dealt with, and her friends deal with things that my friends and I have dealt with at school. But she has a different background for me. She has a different upbringing. So, like, the way that I would react to a situation isn't necessarily the way that she would react to a situation.
okay.
And I kind of wanted it to be like, like for example, I said that, this is somebody who tries to subvert the objectification of women, and like when it comes to hookup culture, and she kind of wants to take back that control and like treat guys as objects and treat them as if they don't matter. Like that's not something that I've ever been able to do. I definitely have get attached very easily. So I was curious in what it would be like to write somebody who doesn't get attached in the same way that I get attached.
Right, right. And it's so interesting. I love this perspective in a book because we're seeing so much more of that now in like our everyday lives. Women are really reclaiming their power, or, maybe are treating men more like objects, in the reverse. And now it's like a whole like, oh, like masculinity is being dismantled. And I'm like, no, like I think women are just getting what they deserve, getting even,
Yeah.
so I think that it's really cool that you were able to one write a perspective that you don't typically see in a lot of books, and also write from a perspective that you don't necessarily fully understand as your lived experience. So tell me a little bit more about that. Like what prompted the idea of creating this character who is sort of like the opposite of you? Is it sort of like I wish that I could have been more like this sort of thing, or like tell me how that came about?
Well, when I learned about writing in undergrad and graduate school, they talked about like obsessions and like things that you can't get out of your head. And there was kind of like a joke that like, you end up writing the same story over and over again until you finally get out of your system what you were trying to talk about.
Wow.
And I think for me, it's not necessarily that she does things that I wish I could have done. It's more of I can't really go back and change things in the past. I can't really go back and, like make different decisions. I don't know if I would even want to, like on some ends, you could argue that you should because like there can be embarrassing memories or traumatizing memories. But,
Right.
Ntozaki Shanke, actually, she wrote For Color Girls. She said, identity is everything that's ever happened to us and our reactions to it.
Right.
So I think through fiction, it's a way of kind of not traveling back in time, but it's a way of like seeing how certain things would play out, certain lived experience that you didn't get to have. So I would say it's more of, I was curious about it. I was curious what it would be like to have somebody who felt things differently and like it's not even like she's completely emotionless and that she doesn't have feelings. Like she definitely started out in a very similar place from where I was, from like feeling like she's not enough, feeling like she wants like I actually wrote down a list of like 60 to 70 different lies that she told herself and that I've told myself about things, like the idea that love has to be earned, the idea that like self I think there's an important question that I was asked that I still don't fully know the answer to, but I'm trying to answer it throughout the novel. And it's what's more important, being a good person or a happy person? And that's something that she pretty much spends the entire novel trying to trying to answer, because I told myself for the longest time, like maybe I put too much stock in karma, but like I was like, oh, if bad things happen to me, I must be a bad person because that's how karma works. But then I also watch people who do like messed up things and like they kind of don't really face any repercussions for it. So it's just like, like maybe like I'm not saying karma doesn't exist, but I think there's not really a way for me to know the specifics of how the rules work. And it's just too much pressure on yourself to like, kind of like give yourself a point every time you do something good or take away a point every time you do something bad. Like it's impossible to keep score at that point because we make too many mistakes as humans.
Right. And then it becomes obsessive.
Yeah. So I think with Maya, it was more of like, I wanted to revisit that perspective and like showcase, because I think for me it's always been about showing perspectives that aren't necessarily seen, and I haven't really read anything like what I've written. And like especially in the like my choice to write in second person as well, like I wanted people who may not, even if they can't directly like relate to her because they might not be mixed, they might not be a woman, they might not be whatever, I want them to be able to like be placed in her shoes at that moment. So it's like it's no longer like, oh, Maya's going through this, it's like you're going through this, you're doing this, you're walking home. So now it's like you're forced to like be put into that perspective, because I feel like writing is my way of protesting almost, because I feel like you can't control other people, you can't tell them what to do or what to think, but you can make them feel things and you can make them empathize with people, and that kind of like brings them in the direction of being like, oh, okay, this is a different perspective, this is like I didn't see things this way, like maybe I need to reevaluate how I see the world and what my thoughts are.
Right. Wow. Okay. So it sounds like you've got, put a lot of thought into your character development, which I think is amazing. And I think for people who don't write, it's really hard for them to just to understand, how fully, to fully understand how technical the writing process is, and I know you mentioned to me that you had so many different drafts of the story. So my question to you is a writer ever done?
So I ask that question all the time because I asked my professors who like have had their books published. I was like, how did you reach the point where you were done? How did you reach the point where you knew it was finished? And they basically told me like when it gets to a point where you kind of like don't really want to look at it anymore and you kind of done all the work that needs to be done. And like there's also the fear of like overwriting, if you edit something too much to the point where you're just like, okay, like now you're like writing for the editing, not necessarily writing for the context of the story. And like even to this day I wouldn't say that Habits is fully finished. But I submitted it because I realized if I waited for it to be perfect and waited for it to be finished, my work would never be out there at that point. And like, I kind of was just like, like it has like the major key themes that I want to talk about, and it's doing the major work that I want it to do. So
Yeah.
that's enough for me to like have like it, like other people take a look at it basically.
Right.
um I would say in terms of like, that's such an interesting like perspective though, like in terms of like whether or not something's finished, because I don't fully know the answer to that because I haven't
That's
fully
okay.
finished anything yet.
That's okay.
um I think for me it's just when it does everything that you want to do, because I think everyone has in their head like a particular goal, a particular thing. And like for me, like when it comes to like stories or TV shows or movies, like I'm all about the character. If I don't care about the character, if I can't root for the character, I'm not going to be invested in the story. I'm not going to be interested in what happens to them,
That makes yeah.
So I wanted to, I think my priority was being as open and honest and vulnerable as possible so that people could see her as a real person. I feel like if she was too perfect, it would be difficult to relate to. And if she had no redeeming qualities, then you wouldn't root for her. So I wanted it to be somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And like, I'm also thinking about like the idea of like what you said earlier about like, how much I put myself into it. And I've actually gotten advice from other people to put more of myself into it.
Oh wow.
But I've stayed away from that because in my head I had an idea that like I wasn't somebody that people would root for. And I think Maya has that in her head too. And
Mhm.
I think like part of like maybe the reason why it hasn't been finished is because like I need to figure out, like I know that I'm worth rooting for, like I need to figure out why though, like I need to like stop believing, like stop going based off of what other people say and like find in myself like why I'm the hero and like what makes me worthy. And I think once I figure that out for myself, I'll be able to like figure out how to show Maya going through that. But
Right.
it's also difficult because like I'm realizing a lot of these things as adults, whereas she's still in college. So then there's the dilemma, do I have her figure it out since it's
Yeah.
fiction and she's in college, or do I have it be closer to my story and have it that she doesn't really get things figured out in undergrad and it doesn't like, you know, start to make sense until adulthood. But
So
until I make that decision, I need to set it up so that it's known that that's the direction she's going, regardless of whether or not she, meets that by
yeah.
the end of the book, if that makes sense.
Wow, I mean, I love how intentional all this is sounding and just hearing, your process. I don't think I've ever interviewed a fiction writer before. Yeah, I don't think so. So it's so powerful and empowering hearing your process and just how much goes into character development. Like I said, I think that, for people who don't do what you do, it might be difficult for them to fully understand like the magnitude of effort and work and like mental work and questioning of yourself and your character and how much to put in that's reflective of me, or how much to keep out that's reflective of me. I don't think that that's something that people tend to think about when it comes to writing, because you just know that if something you read is something that you like, for just a consumer, from a consumer standpoint, you just know that you like it. You don't necessarily know why or know the work that goes behind it. So it's amazing to know you put so much thought into it. And how rewarding is it that it's not even fully finished and you already got the grand prize from this thing that you like applied to, knowing that you didn't necessarily feel fully ready. That's amazing. And it's a national competition too, correct?
Yeah, I saw one of the other winners is from the United Kingdom. So I definitely forgot that when I applied. It's not even just national, it's worldwide. So it's like
Wow.
yeah, and like there's other winners from like Los Angeles and and I think for me it was very validating because I reached a point where there's kind of like a voice in my head. I don't know if it's like from being a woman, from being a person of color, from age, it could be a mixture, but there's always a voice in my head telling me I can't do something or that I'm not good enough
Mhm.
and that like, I'm just going to fail, and then the perfectionist in me would sometimes rather do nothing than do something the wrong way.
Yeah.
But I think getting this prize, like even though the story isn't like 100% finished, it was very validating for me because it was anonymous. They didn't know my name. They didn't know anything about me. Like they only got the story as it was. And the judge didn't know me, so there was no way that there was favoritism. There was no way that it was like,
Yeah.
and like, I think I've doubted myself throughout my life for so long for so many reasons. And like I've had, you know, like in my undergrad experience, like it was kind of very traumatizing because like, you know, they kind of made this idea that if you didn't write like them, that you just weren't really a good writer. So like there was a lot of people trying to write like these professors who were like teaching their own books as textbooks. And like, you know, like I didn't even read like an author of color until probably my junior or senior year. So like everything I read was like the perspective of middle-aged white people. And I just didn't care. I wasn't invested because, you know, like, and like then I think I was introduced to Junot Diaz, and he was writing in second person, and he was writing, you know, he was like, it was still literary fiction, but it was like not holding back, you know. And like even like when I think about like the workshops, you know, I would use pop culture, or I would use like, you know, references, or like things that have to do with like, you know, the Black experience, or things that like, you know. And I realized through that there's kind of an unspoken assumption that like any character you read is white unless you explicitly say otherwise, you know? And like there have been times where people have been like, oh, I don't get this reference, you have to explain it to me, or you have to do that. So like having the freedom to kind of just be like, no, you know, I'm not, like, it makes you ask who you're writing for. And like you realize like you can't really write to everyone, you know, you have to have like a specific, you know, audience in mind. And like it doesn't mean that everyone can't enjoy your book, but I think if I tried to cater to every single like culture, you know, like I think if you think about things in your head, nobody's like thinking like, oh, you know, like I'm going to use this slang word, this means that, this does that. Like no, they just use it, you know, they just, it's just kind of how it works. And I think like for me, I mainly just I put all the, I think it was just really validating to win this award because it was like shutting up that voice almost. It was like, I can't argue against this. I can't say it was dumb luck. I can't say that it was like favoritism. I can't say, like, there's no excuse other than the fact that it was just good. And like even like the judge, like I reached out to her to like thank her, and she was like, it was an easy decision. And that literally kind of like made me feel so touched and honored, because literally like the week before I submitted it, I had one person telling me I had horrible written grammar, and I had another person telling me my writing was choppy. So this is kind of like a screw you to them. And like I feel like, not like I'm not angry at them, you know, they didn't say it out of malice, but I think it's just inspiring because it's kind of like, if I can do it, anyone else can do it. And like that's always been my goal, you know, to rise above the ranks and like bring as many people with me as I can to the table, because I feel like there are so many talented people out there who like are just being given up on, or like, you know, just not being taken seriously because they're not like the traditional expected, you know, the norm, you know. Like I remember in undergrad, I had another friend named Morgan, and she was also Black and also a writer, but that was probably where our similarities like ended. But she went to like a conference for her workshop with the teacher of like the class, and like to talk about her story that she wrote. And basically his advice to her was, just do whatever I told the other Morgan to do. Yeah. And like, I mean, I could be here all day talking about the atrocities that I dealt with in undergrad. And it kind of like completely destroyed my confidence. And like, you know, it made me almost fall out of love with writing for a while. But then it was getting into grad school and like being like having people like me for who I was, and like my writing, and like genuinely like, you know, I existed there. And I like, it kind of like, I found myself at that point. And like, that's when I started to gain some of my confidence back. And, you know, I think it's just a lesson to everyone that like, you know, things don't have to be perfect, you know, like my grammar may not have been perfect, but she saw like the things that she saw in the story were like the themes, the characters, and like that's kind of what mattered. And like at the end of the day, there are editors for grammar, there are, you know, other people that can work on that. But I think what it taught me is that like I know the things that can't be taught. And I think that's what counts the most, you know, like the other things they can be taught, that comes with time. But like, I think for me, it just inspired me to like keep going anyway, you know, like it, like even if things seem bleak, or even if like you don't really know the direction that life's going to go, like just keep going anyway, and things will figure themselves out kind of as they go along.
Right. And something else that came to mind when you were talking, like somebody has told me this. I think probably like 5 million times I've been told this because I used to have very intrusive thoughts too. But basically it's so corny, but it's like intrusive thoughts are not true. And anything that is like kind of like forcing itself into your psyche is just like anything that's natural and honest and real is not going to have to force its way into your head, you know. um so I'm glad that like that's something that you've kind of been overcoming or have overcome, and I'm excited for you, just to see how far you go with this book or with anything else that you want to do. And I'm happy that you got this award and it was able to kind of like lift your confidence in yourself and in your writing. Because the interesting thing about writing to me is if you give it to 5 different people, everybody's going to have something different that they think is wrong with it. It's going to be grammar, it's going to be syntax, it's going to be not enough, it's going to be too much. So I think it's really important, just as a writer myself, to trust yourself, to trust your process, and to, be able to fully understand for yourself when something feels right and not not give too much stock to what other people think. So I'm happy that you're finally kind of getting to this point of realization, and it's going to make you so much of a better writer. But so, you've talked about writing in undergrad, you've talked about writing in grad school. When was like the first moment that you decided that you wanted to be a writer?
So March 3rd, 2009.
Mhm.
Um,
Wow.
yeah, this is like, I don't mean to be shady, but I read Twilight and
Mhm.
I was like, wow, I can do better than that.
A lot of people
And
say that,
like,
yeah.
after that, it kind of inspired me because I realized I was like, look, there are other people who aren't like, I'm not gonna like pretend that I'm the best writer in the world, but there are other people out there who aren't necessarily as strong
Yeah.
and they're still doing what I'm telling myself I'm not good enough to do. Like it's not necessarily about being the best, but it's just about having like that grit and that perseverance and like just not like having one more in you, like when you think that like, you're out and you're done and like you're ready to quit, you have to have one more round in you. And that's generally when the success kind of comes. And
Mhm.
I think also for me, like I was always a heavy reader, like I found
I
out.
love that about you, actually.
Yeah.
That's
I
funny.
went to, so at the Abington Free Library, they have it so there's no limit to how many books you can take out. You just have to be able to return them in time or like renew them in time. So like I started bringing a duffel bag. I like brought a wheelbarrow at one point, and like I literally was just constantly reading like nonstop, and it was just so fascinating. And like it wasn't necessarily that I was trying to like escape the world, but like I don't know. I think when I was younger, I was at a point where I kept waiting for my life to begin. And I felt like there were just certain things that like, needed to happen that like, like, it was just my life didn't start yet for some reason. And like in between, waiting for that to happen, I kind of wanted to like see other people's worlds and like see what they're going through and like, just see how like I read everything from paranormal to dystopian to, and like unfortunately like undergrad kind of made me a bit more pretentious, so like I can't enjoy like trash reads as much, because I'm just like, oh, this is like this is like not that great, or oh, that doesn't make sense, like it didn't take the enjoyment out of reading, but it made me a bit pickier and snobbier. But I also think that just was a sign of like me growing as a writer and a person. And but I think when I first started writing, like I got excited about like everything they could do, like in the books that I was reading, and I was like, I want to see what I can do. So I think my first book, it was horribly titled, but I was, in middle school. It was called Witch Way Out, and it was supposed to be about, I think, witch hunts had come back, and it
Mhm.
was like a distant future, and like my main character was like a witch, and like she was trying to like, figure out how to like get peace between the other supernatural creatures, but also how to like not be caught and like not be murdered for being a witch and stuff like that. And then I think I got discouraged because James Patterson came out with Witch and Wizard, and like it was like also kind of like about witch hunts in the future. And like it just felt like every time I started a story, something else came out that like was similar enough, but something that my advisor actually told me, Marcus Burke, is he was like, you know, like that actually works to your advantage, because if you
That
can
sounds so
show,
powerful to me.
he was like, if you can show like, oh, this is something that is successful and it works, people might be more interested in like giving your idea a chance because you'll have like proof to give it to them. And like at the end of the day, like every writer kind of steals, like not that I stole, because like I didn't read those things before I wrote, but like every writer kind of like gets ideas from other things and gets inspiration from other things. And I think as you go through more and more drafts, it becomes less of those other stories and more of your own story as they develop.
Yeah.
You know, and I think ideas can come from anywhere.
Right.
And, you know, like I definitely got into writing by writing novels, but then I think there was a shift in undergrad because for some reason they like mainly like kind of beat short stories down our throat. Like I took one novel class and like 18 billion short story classes.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of forgot how to write a novel structurally, you know, because like short stories, like you have like a shorter space to kind of get everything across.
Mm-hmm.
And like I think that's also why like my chapters in Learned Behaviors, the novel I'm working on now, are kind of more standalone, almost like they could work as their own stories, but they also work together.
Right.
And I kind of wanted it to be almost episodic, like TV shows, like each episode works on its own, but then like you see the connections and like then there's like the season finale and stuff like that.
That's really cool.
So yeah, I think for me it was just like I was just always interested in creating my own worlds, and the idea of I knew I always wanted to give back, and I knew I always wanted to make a difference in the world and leave some kind of legacy, because, you know, like it's kind of like pessimistic, but I don't think I'm going to live to see the day the world becomes what it needs to be. But I feel like my descendants will. And I feel like just like my ancestors, you know, they had like a shittier time than I did, but they put in the work to like make things better for me. Like I want to do the same thing for mine, you know. I feel like one of the best ways to get to know somebody is through their writing, you know. So I, even if I'm not around, like I'll always be there through the books, you know. And like I also kind of wanted to write almost like a survival guide for other people who feel like they're a mess and like feel like, you know, they can't get it together. Like I wanted to write a realistic character who wasn't perfect and didn't have it together, and like what, like show her process of like getting herself together and learning how to be happy and learning to love, so that other people can kind of like just get inspired to not quit, you know, get inspired to not give up.
Yeah, I mean, all of this is amazing. I don't think I've ever heard a book referred to as a survival guide, but it makes so much sense. And I think that, again, just the attention and the thought and the attention that you put into your writing really speaks to how good you are. And so I'm really, like I said, excited to see the final product. Even, you know, like I mentioned to you guys earlier, Morgan sent me Habits. And before I talked to her, you know, off the record, I thought that it was a standalone story. I think it works very well as such. And I love short stories personally. So I think it's really cool that you've been kind of able to, or, you know, your idea of what you'd like your book to be. It takes, I can't talk today, sorry. It takes, you know, chapters as individual stories that also work together. I think it's by, I'm not even gonna like mess up her name, but there's a book that I like that's also that also kind of follows like a very similar premise. I'll have to send you the name of it. You've probably read it because it sounds like you're very well read. But yeah, no worries. So I mean, that was the last question I had for you. You answered like everything that I had written down and more. So before we go, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on that I might not have gotten to?
Yeah, I mean, like I guess also like I think for me, like the main other issue is like a second person isn't something that is really super common, let alone for a whole novel. And like I've had like multiple people be like, oh, try first person or try third, you know, I'm more used to this, it's easier. And like I kind of, it's just always felt the most natural for me. And I think me sticking to that and sticking to my guns, like, and also trying to like sort of play with different forms and different structures, like I'm trying to like create my own lane almost, you know. And like one of the things that like my professors, like my mentors are from grad school, or my mentors for life, like I'm still very close to them, Marcus Burke and Tracy O'Neill, they both said that like I can't really, like I keep looking for other people and other perspectives and other opinions to like help me write this book, but I'm realizing like the reason why I'm coming up short is because there isn't really anyone who's doing what I'm doing. So I'm not going to be able to see that elsewhere, you know, because it's not there. And it's like, I'm again, like creating this new thing.
Yeah.
And like, you know, it's like kind of forcing me to like shut down those voices that say that I can't do it, because if I let them win, then nothing's going to be finished.
Right.
So I think just the major advice that I would give to other people is like, you know, take opinions and outside perspectives like with a grain of salt, you know, because like I think in my head I was like, you know, like how do you decide like what opinions to listen to, because there's like the positive feedback and the compliments, and then there's also like, oh, you should work on this, you should do that. And I kind of also saw that as like, you know, like why should I believe positive criticisms over negative criticisms? Like what's the difference, you know? They're both criticisms. And like I realized like in terms of like writing and also in terms of life, if it's criticism that makes you grow, then it's good criticism.
Yeah.
If it's criticism that doesn't really make anything go in a positive direction, then you can kind of just like put it to the side and be like, you know, thank you for that feedback, but you know, I'm still going to do what I want to do. So I think the biggest like challenge for me has been learning to know what to take with me and like what to put to the side. And like that's been like a fascinating experience seeing where that goes.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
also think it's just like an important lesson for other people, you know, like trust your instinct. You know, your anxiety might tell you that, you know, like you like if you overthink things enough, you might like be able to like bring yourself in all sorts of different directions.
Right.
I kind of described it as like if you look at a word for too long and you convince yourself that it's spelled wrong because you've looked at it too long, like if you like go too deeply into these paranoias, then it's kind of like going to get you all frazzled. But like if you just like trust, you know, like I may have had all these self-doubts and I may have had other people doubting me, but like one thing that's been consistent is every time I thought I would fail, I've risen to the occasion. You know, I didn't think I would get into grad school. I did. I didn't think that I would finish grad school, let alone pass my thesis. I did, you know. And like it's just don't I think it's just like a balance of faith and doubt. Like the doubt is there to let you know what you care about, but it's like kind of like the thing that's scary about faith is like you're taking a risk on yourself. But you know, having faith in yourself, you can never have too much faith in yourself. You can never have too much like investment in yourself, because like that's the way that you're going to grow. And at the end of the day, like nobody's going to care about this book more than me. Nobody's going to want it to succeed more than me. So like I have to basically trust myself and trust my instincts if I want to move forward.
Right. Wow, that's so powerful. I've been like taking notes of the things that you've been saying too, things that I definitely needed to hear for myself. Like I've never heard anybody say doubt is, you know, proof of the things that you care about. And I'm like, wow, like, yes, of course, duh, obviously, but I've never heard it phrased that way. So again, I just really thank you for your honesty and your vulnerability. And I guess to a certain extent, that's kind of what you have to be at least an effective writer. So I
And
think
an effective person too. Like I've realized, you know, like most of the connections I've formed have been because we're both being willing to be vulnerable, you know. But if you don't allow yourself to be
like you're in my head. What is going on? Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm listening.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I was just saying, like, you know, like people put up all these walls to protect themselves from getting hurt because they have trust issues, you know, but those same walls that you're putting up to protect yourself are also keeping you from forming those deep connections that you're craving. So it's kind of like high risk, high reward. You know, you have to be willing to get hurt to get the love that you're looking for.
This is a word. Oh my God. This is like, I've literally been thinking about these very things and talking about these very things so much lately. So I'm shook. Thank you.
I mean, I love this conversation. We can always talk whenever you want.
No, I'm so shook. And I don't know how like religious or spiritual you are, but I'm definitely like a huge believer in God and praying. And I definitely think that this is just like a one-on-one me and you sort of thing that has nothing to do with the interview. But I definitely have been like praying about very similar things. So it just is so powerful to me that we're even having this conversation, because it really just goes to show like how intentional God is and how God really listens, or universe, or whatever you want to call it. But
I
wow.
definitely believe in God. I've struggled with committing to a particular religion
Yeah.
because one, there's not one that I 100% stand by everything with.
Mm-hmm.
And two, the other issue I've had is like my relationship with God has always been very personal.
Yeah.
So the idea of like other people telling you how to live or what to expect, like whether it's coming from a good place or not, I don't want to tell anyone else what to believe in or how to live their life. So like that's why I've been struggling with, connecting to a particular religion. But like I think with my relationship with God, it's always been I wanted there to be one thing that I didn't question.
Yeah.
And like that I chose for that to be God, and like that faith has been kind of like one of the one things that I can control when everything else feels like I can't control that. That is one decision that I know I made for myself that, like, and it's never wavered, I've never, questioned. Though it's funny because my family basically thinks I'm an atheist because I don't talk about religion, but it's mainly just, it's very personal to me.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I don't have a religion either for the very same reasons. So but we have to get out of here. I'm enjoying this conversation so much, and we'll definitely have to continue talking off the record. But again, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to me, to talk about your story, to be honest, to be vulnerable, to be truthful, and to also speak life into some of the things that I've been thinking about, and also dealing with my rambling. Like I can't talk today for some reason. I don't know why. I'm
Oh no, you've been great. I'm a rambler too. So
Yes, but thank you again, Morgan, so much for being here. And before we go, can you just tell everybody where they could potentially like find you or your work?
yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm on Twitter at Morg Nicole, MorgNicole. In terms of my work, I've been published on Assignment Magazine. I've been published on West Trade Review, and also for the Carve Magazine contest, it's going to be published in mid-October. So I'll post that link out to everyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, thank you again for having me. Thank you for this chance and like the opportunity to just talk about my experience. It's been very cathartic for me.
Oh, good,
So,
good. So yes, again, thank you. And I can't wait to see, what's coming for you. And also, whenever anything drops, whenever, it gets published in the magazine or whatever, please just let me know so I can share that with my viewers. Because I'm sure that they would be really interested in checking it out. And I also want to thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of A Millennial Voice, the show. Again, I was here this week with Morgan Green, author, and backed by the Philadelphia Sunday Sun. We're on Facebook every Sunday at 2 p.m. So make sure you guys are checking out our page, or go to www.philosun.com to check out our articles, or you can also get us in print for $40 a year. Again, Morgan, thank you so much for talking to me, and I'll talk to you soon.
thanks. Bye.